Ah, yes, the Booty Renaissance. I'm Regina Barbary, and today I'll be presenting to you Miguel's project because he is too big of a puss. I'll be presenting this project for my beautiful brother Miguel because he's not much of a public speaker. I know I wouldn't be with that voice, not even I can understand him sometimes. Today we're going to be comparing the Renaissance and Surrealism, but first, let's spend 20 minutes on racism. Just kidding. Let's actually begin with some background information on both art styles. Italian Renaissance painting is the painting of the period beginning in the late 13th century and flourishing from the early 15th to the late 16th centuries, occurring in the Italian peninsula, which at that time was divided into many political areas. The most characteristic development of the Italian Renaissance painting is the use of linear perspective, a technique some scholars say was known to the Romans. Other scholars have attributed its revitalization, if not invention, to Filippo Brunelleschi, who developed perspective while drawing the Florence Cathedral baptistry in the early 15th century. Some artists were fascinated with perspective, showing objects and people in proportions with one another. Unlike medieval art, which has people dominating compositions, artists who trained prior to this tradition were quick to see the advantages to linear perspective and incorporated it into their later works. Interest in humanism and the rebirth of Greco-Roman classic also spurs an interest in authentic Greek and Roman sculptures. The ancients gloried in the nude form in a way that was interpreted by medieval artists as pagan. The revival of nudity in life-size sculpture is begun in Florence with Donatello's David, and continued throughout the century. Here we have The Birth of Venus by Sandro Botticelli, which is one of the most famous early Renaissance paintings. Thought to have been painted in the mid-1480s, it has long been suggested that Botticelli was commissioned to paint the work for the Medici family of Florence. However, there are no documents associated with the painting, and its first identification with the Medici family only comes in the 1550 edition of Vasari's Lives. It depicts that the goddess Venus, having emerged from the sea as an adult woman, arriving at the shore. The painting is on display at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. Botticelli's art was never fully committed to naturalism. In comparison to his contemporaries, Botticelli seldom gave weight and volume to his figures and rarely used a deep perspectival space. In The Birth of Venus, Venus's body is anatomically improbable, with elongated neck and torso. Her pose is impossible. Although she stands in a classical contrappo stance, her weight is shifted too far over the left leg for the pose to be held. Moreover, her positioning on the edge of the scalloped shell would certainly cause it to tip over. The bodies and poses of the ones to the left are even harder to figure out. The background is summery and the figures cast no shadows. It is clear that this is a fantasy image. Now let's go back to Donatello's David, which is famous for being the first unsupporting standing work of bronze cast during the Renaissance, and the first freestanding nude male sculpture made since antiquity. It depicts David with an enigmatic smile, posed with his foot on Goliath's serf's head, just after defeating the giant. The youth is completely naked, apart from a laurel top hat and boots, bearing the sword of Goliath. According to Vasari, the statue stood on a column in the middle of the courtyard of the Palazzo Medici. An inscription seems to have been explained the statue's significance as a political monument. The iconography of the bronze David follows that of Donatello's marble David. A young hero stands with sword in hand, the severed head of his enemy at his feet. Visually, however, this statue is startling differently. David is both physically delicate and remarkably effeminate. The head has been said to have been inspired by classical sculpture of Anytus, a favorite of Hadrian renowned for his beauty. The statue's physique, contrasted with the absurdly large sword in hand, shows that David has overcome Goliath not by physical powers, but through God. However, the intention of Donatello is still debated among scholars. The boy's nakedness further implies that the presence of God, contrasting the youth with the heavily armored giant, David, is presented uncircumcised, which is generally customary for male nudes in the Italian Renaissance art. Hey, didn't Andy get an A on this? Then why are you even trying? Anyone could get an A on this. Surrealism is a cultural movement that began in the early 1920s and is best known for its visual artworks and writings. The aim was to resolve the previously contradictory conditions of dream and reality. Artists painted unnerving illogical scenes with photographic precision, created strange creatures from everyday objects, and developed painting techniques that allowed the unconscious to express itself. Inspired by the psychological studies of Freud and Jung, Surrealists sought to represent an unseen world of dreams, subconscious thoughts, and unspoken communication. Starting with the theories of André Breton in 1924, the movement went in two directions: the abstract direction of biomorphic and suggestive forms, and the veristic tradition of using reality-based subjects put together in unusual ways. Those who seek to understand the inscrutable world of surrealism by looking at a painting's title will find themselves even more confused than when they started. Surrealism is meant to puzzle, challenge, and fascinate. Its sources are in mysticism, psychology, and the symbolic. It is not meant to be clearly understood and didactic. This is the trickery of images painted by René Magritte in 1929 when she was 30 years old. The picture shows a pipe. Below it, Margaret painted "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," French for "this is not a pipe." The painting is not a pipe, but rather an image of a pipe. This masterpiece of surrealism creates a three-way paradox out of the conventional notion that objects correspond to words and images. Like the other artists and poets associated with the surrealist movement, Margaret sought to overthrow what he saw as the oppressive rationalism of the bourgeois society. His art during these essential years is at times violent, frequently disturbing, and filled with discontinuities. He constantly interrogated conventions of language and visual representation, using methods that included the misnaming of objects, doubling and repetition, mirroring and concealment, and the deception of vision seen in half-walking states, all of them devices that cast doubt on the nature of appearances, both in paintings and the reality itself. The persistent tension Margaret maintained during these years between nature and artifice, truth and fiction, reality and surreality, is one of the profound achievements of his art. Now we're brown, so of course we had to include some paintings by the OG being Frida Kahlo. This is an oil painting by Frida. The painting was the first large-scale work done by her, and it is considered one of her most notable paintings. It's a double self-portrait depicting two versions of Kahlo seated together. One is wearing a white European-style dress, while the other is wearing a traditional Tijuana dress. Some art historians have suggested that the two figures in the painting are a representation of Frida's dual heritage. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was German, while her mother, Matilde Calderón, was a mix of Spanish and Amerindian. The painting was created in 1939, the same year that Kahlo divorced Diego Rivera. According to Kahlo's friends, Fernando Gamboa, the painting was inspired by two paintings that Kahlo had seen earlier that year at the Louvre, The Two Sisters and the anonymous Gabrielle Destres and one of her sisters. Paolo Uccello, an Italian painter of the early Renaissance, was the only historical figure mentioned in the first Surrealist Manifesto of 1924. Like Bosch, he was admired because he was obsessed by a particular vision, which used, but perverted, normal vision. Uccello was an artist preoccupied with geometry and the elements of the newly invented linear perspective to a degree recognized in his own time as excessive. His three versions of a battle scene show the lances Breton mentioned, but it is not the clash of armies Breton's words were meant to evoke. Rather, the Surrealists saw the battle as being between the real and the unreal. For Uccello's successive use of a technique applied to the natural world gave an unnatural look to his figures. In this way, Paolo Uccello was part of the Surrealist history, just as X is considered Surrealist whenever and wherever it existed. One of the most famous Surrealist artists had a really cool mustache. No, not this one, that one. Dali gathered ideas from Renaissance paintings and transformed them into a modern Surrealist interpretation. In the Madonna of Port Eligat, Dali takes ideas from Piero della Francesca's Madonna and Child with Angels and Six Saints and reintroduced them in a Surrealist manner. In both paintings, the Madonna clasps her hands above Jesus in same stance. Both Madonnas are placed in a platform with their clothing rippling down in the same manner. The two paintings also include an iconography of a seashell and an egg. Dali's representation of the shell, however, is turned inverted in the same manner as the artist Carlo Crivelli. The shell is a reference to Venus and how Mary replaces her in the rise of Christianity. The egg delicately hangs from the shell by a thin thread. This is meant to symbolize new life. Dali felt a particular affinity to Raphael, even going so far as to call him his alter ego. This self-portrait shows just how much he admired him, that he even strove to resemble him. Referring to Raphael, he said, "I let my hair grow long, as long that of a girl, and looking at myself in the mirror, I loved to assume that melancholy expression, the fascinating stance of his self-portrait. How I would have liked to look like him." In the portrait, we see a mirror image of Raphael's hidden signature on his School of Athens wall in the Vatican, and a young Dali, evidenced by his lack of mustache. Dali is at the top of the road that dominates all Cadix and leads to the Cove of Saboya, the village in the background sparkling in the morning sunshine. Behind Dali, we see what is nearly an island, Sortel, the estate of the Pickets. Dali often went to this spot to paint the landscape in different lights. All Dali's interest is turned into the atmosphere of the picture. For the sake of accuracy, he had to return to the scene every day at the exact hour when the sun hit the village, leaving the cliff in the foreground shadow where he placed himself. Then he worked on the likeness of himself in front of a mirror in his studio during the hot hours of the day. Sadly, we've come to the end of this presentation. Don't forget to like, and remember, I'm Regina Burberry.